Absolutely, mate. And I think there's still a lot to be seen and a lot to be desired by Graham Potter if he rebuilds himself and trying to turn that around and trying to bring that back into that respect. But Rosenior landed his job, mate, in the respect of the fact that Maresca was sacked, right? And do you think Enzo Maresca was unfairly sacked in terms of the job which he did at Chelsea?
I think it was a bit unjust, really. I mean, that's how I see it from the outside. Um, I, I know that things will get, but again, it was a very quick turn of events, really, how it drastically changed with his relationship and him and Fiona, really. Because can't remember what game was it, City, or was it another game that he just declined to talk to the press because they said he wasn't well or whatever. It was just very, very peculiar. I think with Maresca, well, he got, let's face it, he still got Chelsea a trophy with that Club World Cup Championship or whatever it was. That's had some really decent teams in there. Um, and I think, considering the circumstances, with coming from Leicester into Chelsea in that role, I thought he handled it really well, actually. And he didn't get enough praise for what he did do right. But I mean, that's me seeing it from the outside. You, as a Chelsea fan, how did you see it?
Initially, when Maresca first came in, there was a lot of talk about him being relentless and him wanting to select some players and how he went about that style. I know one of the first things he did was cut Raheem Sterling out of the squad very, very quickly. Now, he would have seen Raheem Sterling on a day to day basis, and we know that Raheem has his own kind of personality. He's had these kind of managerial clashes in the past. I know one prominent clip which stands out in my mind was when he was a young player and he clashed with Brendan Rodgers. But again,
Mm,
he's a young player in that context. And when he first cut out Raheem Sterling, I was a little bit frustrated by it because I do like Raheem Sterling. I felt, well, we've just invested a lot of money. He's come from a very successful Man City side for years. If you get that player performing, he will be a very good player for you. But obviously, he sees him day to day. He's on the training ground with him. He's got his own merits, which he wants to set himself by his own standard to really go, actually, I don't want these players. And he was in that situation where he inherited a huge Chelsea squad and you had to trim it down because there's so much talent within that team. You have to be successful, but also realistic. You don't want to waste that talent in the same way as well. But so anyway, he cut Sterling out of the squad. But he grew on me over the period of time, and I think that's because we were playing some good football. We were challenging the good teams. We won the Club World Championship. We were, maintaining a good level of performance. Okay, we were third. We weren't second or first, where we really should be pushing to really get into those strides. Third is sort of, I didn't feel we were going to get any higher under him. So if we were a club who were okay with finishing top four year after year and qualifying for Europe and to have a good reputation, he would be a very good manager. But I don't think he was going to push us any further. So it was I was gutted to see him sacked so early on, but I like Rosenior and I hope he comes in and does a good job himself. 13 games in, he's lost all three of them to Arsenal at the moment, so there's still a lot of work for Rosenior to go in and do, but he wouldn't have been my first choice as much as I like Liam, and I think he's got a good success ahead of him. I personally would have gone for Unai Emery. I think he's the biggest shout for me every time. I don't know why City and Chelsea aren't looking at him as the
mm.
first point of manager to come in, but Maresca, I think he was undone by. But out of that, then, do you think Man City, considering there's been these links with Maresca, Premier League's proven success, both Leicester and with Chelsea now, currently out of a job, one of Guardiola's former assistants, do you see him in with a shout on a short list for the Man City job, or do you think Vincent Kompany's in with a shout, considering Kompany is at a huge club like Bayern and the success that he's had at City as a player, and now what the success he's having as a manager, also has more European experience, and if he can win his second league title as well, he's a bit more proven than Maresca. Do you see them going for Unai Emery, or do you see someone else on the list which they might be going for, like an Enrique, for example?
I think this is it. Is with City, it's an interesting one because you can't imagine City without Pep Guardiola. To be fair, it's just like we said about with players missing, and when like I think we spoke off there, like when you say about like players like Kane, you can't replace them. It's the same with managers in that respect. They say that it goes stale, but you start to think you see shades of a City team go stale, but then something clicks and then they get going again. And I think if I was City, I would do everything I could to keep Guardiola there as long as he wants to be there. Um, but in terms of if he was to step down, it's a hard one because we don't know. We understand like their style of play through Pep, but who would they get in that can replicate his style as such? I mean, Unai Emery's plays good football, but he's not as hands-on with his attacking prowess as Pep Guardiola is. Maybe I don't know if it's because of player quality and that is different. Um, but the only one that I can really think of that springs to mind, but then it's not really worked out for him for a while, was Nagelsmann. But would would City be looking at that? Would they be looking? I mean, with company, you say that's a good shout. As we've just alluded to in this pod, that a lot of clubs don't do seem to go down that route at the moment. It's people within the club that have seen what it's like. Company could be a good shout. I mean, what a swings and roundabout from Burnley to Bayern to then Man City. He's just crazy. But um, he's still achieved good things at Bayern Company. Some big names in there, some big egos, so he's managed to handle that. Um, with Burnley, it showed that he had limited budget. With City, he'd have just riches in money. Maresca, would he? Lowe's been linked. It's a hard one. Um, but I think whatever happens, if that was to keep Pep, I think they'll just keep on firing as long as he's there, even if it does have its stale moments. If they was to go down a different path, I think we would see a change in City, a different culture within City that we've been used to over the years. And would again, if they wasn't to get that success because of how much money that they spend, would they keep with managers if it wasn't to go their way? They've kept with Pep because of his background, of course. You know, even in sticky times, as we've said, they've had given him backing. But because it's Pep Guardiola, probably the best manager in the world at the moment with what he's achieved, would they give Emery time if it was going a bit Pete's on? Would they give um, company time? Would they give Maresca time? Because it goes back to that point. They can't if it goes run 4 months in, 5 months in, and they're sixth, fifth. They can't, decide to sack or whatever because it's just not giving managers the time. And I think this is it. Is managers getting sacked just generally left, right, and centre now at all sorts of level, from Premiership even down to Football League. We're seeing it that they're changing managers like left, right, and centre. Um, and I think it's a lot of it is not just down to fan pressure and social media pressure, but I think finances do come into it a long way. They look at their books and think, right, Christ, we can't afford to, you know, again, I'm using the Spurs model here, but Spurs are looking at it thinking we can't go down because we've got this brand spanking new stadium in inverted commas. And it's going to cause us more a loss than it would be making profits if we was to go be in for championship. Maybe that's what they was looking at when they set Thomas Frank. But it's there's so many things that I think come with football, but I think sackings are just happening too regular. I think there should be a little clause in there that you should have at least the X amount of time before you can get sacked from a club, because I think then it gives managers chance to see it at all angles through for good and for bad, and then you can assess come end of year where their progress is. Obviously, it would be a risk for a big club if they was really struggling in the top six side, if you like. But I'm going off the beaten track here. It's just thinking at all different angles. And you said about Unai Emery, I'm just going to say this. If he was to get the City job, yes, I think he'll do a really good job at City, if I'm honest. Because like you, I'm a big Unai Emery fan. Luca. But I think I fear for Villa. When he was to walk, Villa would just implode again, and they'll be back to where they was in the past. They won't be able to maintain what Unai Emery's done because he's done an absolutely brilliant job there.
And I think that's exactly what I think he's coming. I think he's done such an incredible job since being there and taking over. And I think he is such a good manager. I think he's one of those where there's so many good clubs which could come in for him and try to appoint him in terms of that respect. Where, okay, he's been at PSG, but I think he was very successful at PSG. Pochettino went in, didn't do that good of a job compared to Unai Emery, and we've seen the job that he's done at Seville. We saw the job he did at Seville, at Villarreal as well, and he had that great success there. And now he's pulling off at Aston Villa with the limited, restrictions which he has, or the restrictions with the limitations, because he can't go off and sign all the players that he wants to sign. But he's got some of the young English players performing. He's got other good players like John Duran performing. He's got Martinez in goals, who was in phenomenal form a couple of seasons ago. He's got Tyrone Mings, who's been fantastic. There's a number of great players
There is a number
in
of
that
great
squad.
players, and I think that's it. Even with John McGinn, Luca, that was there, part of the club and leader of the club, but he's pushed him on to that next level, and he's helped bring that into his Scotland form, even to help him qualify for the World Cup. I'm sure, but I think this is it. It's like, again, this is going to be another controversial claim that I'm going to make tonight, but I really do think that Arsenal wouldn't be anywhere near fighting for these titles now if it wasn't for Emery's imprint in it in the first place, because he was so unlucky there when he got sacked.
I think that completely that, mate, and I think he was always unfairly done at Arsenal. I think fan pressure was there at the moment, and K fans were unhappy. But you're always going to have that transition period after a long-term manager is there. We've seen it United when David Moyes came in. There was always going to be that transition period which you struggle with. So you have to be willing to give your manager a more period of time to certainly go through it. But I think those are the foundations. I think he came in and wanted to build on what Arsene did, and then he set that up in terms of some of the players which have been there and now. Arteta's come in and okay, still only won 2 trophies in X amount of years, but they're still pushing year after year. They're still within that great shot. If they were up there, first, second, and they dropped off, bottled the title, and then after that, year after year, then they were just lingering around fourth, fifth, maybe sixth, right? You're going to go, actually, we need a bit more consistency to push on here, right? So we need a bit of a world-class manager to come in and do that. So I think that's the interesting thing. I think in terms of what you're saying there should be a window, or that there should be a amount of time where a manager is allowed before they are sacked, right? I think that could work in a league like they have in America, because if there's no relegation, there's no promotion, they could have that window where actually they could justify, well, actually this is the period where you got the sack managers, or make that managerial change. I think that could work. I think with the Premier League, we're never going to see that, simply based upon the money which is involved, which is a shame, because when you look at it, again, Ryan Mason, Eric Ramsey, Michael Carrick, Frank Lampard, there's so many young managers are out there where they deserve that chance to really have the opportunity to, try and prove themselves, try and develop as well. They need to be given that spaces, and they can be given those spaces in like under 21s and in the academy, etc. But then if they want to progress and get up there to be in the Premier League themselves or manage the bigger clubs, they're never going to get that opportunity if they're sacked at the first hurdles in a very short space of time.
Exactly. I think this is it. Is fine. I think finances have a big say all around. I can't remember who it was. It might have been Mick McCarthy that said it on the podcast with Tony Pulis, one that they do. And I saw what he said in the sense of that, if Coventry was to go up this season, great, but then would they be able to survive financially in it, to cope and to invest into that squad? Um, yeah, they've got fan base, they've got some foundations in place, definitely. But you just fear that if, again, Lampard was to get Coventry promoted, if they'd gone first 8 games without a win, say, his job will be under scrutiny again. And for someone that's just, I think that's what boards tend to do in some ways, is they have short-term memories of what someone has achieved. I mean, I don't know if we've said it in a pod, but we might have said it on outside of a pod. But I wouldn't have been against Ange to have started this season with Spurs. You know, after winning for Europa League, I think that's the least we could have owed him. Yeah, all right, maybe we wouldn't have got Thomas Franklin and that. And yes, it might have been that we carried off where we left off last season and not won the game for X amount of time. And there might have been a case that a triangle might have had more points than Spurs did at the start of the season. But I think with Ange, he got us that trophy, first trophy in years. But we didn't back him after that. He's come out in the pod with Stick It With Football that was after like Pedro Neto and players like that. But we just didn't act on it, you know? So it's like people were saying, oh, he's clueless. He doesn't have an idea. But it's not a lot better now, realistically. And one thing that I always remember with him is that game against your lot with Chelsea, 9 men with that high line still triggers my gives me anxiety these days, because even when I was seeing Tottenham for a defend a free kick today, it's quite a high line for that, and I was thinking, oh, good grief, like, you know. But I think this is it. Is unfortunately this is where top flight has gone a bit out from that. Ange had charisma about him, no doubt about it. And that's what I remember with Premiership after years and years and years of following it and supporting and watching on TV. There's been managers in there that's had charisma like Ange, Mourinho, McCarthy, you name it. But they don't seem to have any of them anymore. It's just that it's that sort of side of the game has been taken out. It's all about a results business now. And it's whoever gets them results that gets over the dotted line. And then they say, yeah, thank you. It's like we were saying what with Glasner earlier, you know. Thank you for the FA Cup. Thanks for the Charity Shield. First time we've done that, like, ever. And then when they go into think not consider potentially even seconding before the season's up. You know, it's just absolutely bonkers. You could say that you said about money and that. I genuinely think that managers do go in and they're willing to sign a 2-year contract and they think, oh, there's not it. They're happy to help the club, but I think it's just got to the case now that they think, oh, I can get a 5 million payout. Happy days, like, you know, if someone has to pay me off. There don't seem to be. It's just a result business now. That's what I'm trying to say, mainly in the top flight, and that's what's, I suppose, eroded from the beautiful game. I remember watching years of Premiership TV when I was younger, like you, Luca. You know, for days of Michael Essien for Chelsea and days of Jermaine Defoe for Spurs that used to get me off the edge of my seat. But it's not like there's some things in Premiership football that is just so political, like, you know, and it's a shame.
I think so, mate, and I think that's a shame in terms of what's gone. I think that magic of the Premier League is somewhat missing these days, especially when you watch some of the old clips and reels and some of the great moments which we had. And you know, you could name every, you know, Premier League footballer probably across the 20 teams, but these days you don't tend to be able to do that. And I don't know if that's just getting older, mate. But you know, back then you could, because there were so many magnificent players which really stood out and made it those Barclays years, right?